The people at home want it.
Who is your new #1 contender?
In the future, we've got to stick together and live a better life.
Nikki and I are already divorced. She has nothing to do with me anymore. I only have one son right now, and he's Sean. I don't know why you're being so stubborn.
Are you with Pinky right now?
Listen, I'll talk with you later. I gotta go.
Helen, congratulations. You look amazing today.
I'm sorry. The bridegroom may be a bit late.
It's okay. He must be on the way.
Jack, be careful! Pinky doesn't know how to swim!
Jack,
hurry and save her!
What about you?
Me, what?
What do you think of me?
Nothing.
Nothing is good. At least you're thinking of me.
The only person who speaks proper pure English in this entire institution is Meteor Phyllis Atito.
And where is your proper English gotten you?
By the way, Atito, today you look very fresh and refurbished.
Rejuvenate.
Then if the new teacher is beautiful and eloquent as you say, then she must be giving Lady Antibella sleepless nights.
Wait, Kinyajui.
Yes.
You mean you can... are you serious, Kinyajui?
Yes.
So you mean he can... Kinyajui, so I can give you a... No.
A very good morning to you. Thank you for making time to join us here on KBC Channel 1. This is BizCheck, and we shall be having quite some conversations for the next 2 hours. My name is Betty Kiptum. Now, we want to start our program with a conversation on matters infrastructure in Africa, and we'll be touching a bit on Kenya as well. And to have this conversation is Sylvester Kasuku. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Africa Center for Transport and Infrastructure. Welcome on set.
Thank you very much, Betty.
Right. Let's just start with an overview of how infrastructure development is doing in Africa, kindly.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, you can remember that over the last week we completed what is called the Pida week. That is Program for Infrastructure Development for Africa, which is under the African Union and is supported by a number of development partners. Among them is the African Development Bank. It's also supported by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, among a host of other institutions. But first of all, it is important to understand what is the whole story about Pida,
right,
or what are we talking about when we are talking about Pida?
And do tell.
So Program for Infrastructure Development for Africa encompasses a program that has been developed by African leaders under the African Union. And this was done around 2012, in which it was recognized that unless we develop requisite infrastructure for the continent, we will not be able to industrialize, and we will not be able to integrate Africa, and we will not be able to strengthen intra-African trade, and we will not be able to allow for what we call cross-border labor mobility, as well as many other aspects of development that we are looking for in the continent. And this came, at the backdrop of what was seen over the last 3 industrial revolutions, in which the African continent was registered as having not industrialized, for a number of reasons. Key among them is the infrastructure deficit. And going forward, it has been noted that the African continent is actually having a backlog of infrastructure development. And this goes beyond a tune of $180 billion per year. And what we can say is that now, therefore, under the African Union, a program was put together that is guiding the process of infrastructure development in Africa up to the year 2040.
Okay.
The timeline being that we cannot wait beyond the year 2040 for us to reach a timeline of 2063, which is called the AU Agenda 2063, upon which we ought to have resolved many, or if not all, of our development problems. So on the road sector, the drive is to develop over 37,000 kilometers of new railway in the African continent. And you've seen the race towards the development of road infrastructure even in Kenya.
Yes.
The other bit is to develop about 32,000 kilometers of new railway in Africa by the year 2040. We are also supposed to develop an added capacity for ports to the tune of 1.3 billion tons by the year 2040. So when I'm saying 1.3 billion, I'm not saying 1.3 million. 1.3 billion ton added capacity.
Those are very big numbers, and
Yes.
quite some. Your outlook for the future is very big. So how are we doing this far? We're already in 2022, around 18 years to go to 2040,
Right.
and we know that infrastructure projects take time to deliver. So how are we doing so far?
Yes, encompassing all this is equally a budget of about $360 billion that the continent has budgeted under Pida for the development of these projects. It first began with the prioritization of key infrastructure networks, as well as infrastructure platforms, ranging from roads, railways, ports, airports, electricity. And that's why you see, even within the Eastern Africa region, we are talking about, cross-border connections. You find Kenya getting power from Ethiopia, Kenya getting power from Uganda, Rwanda getting power from the rest of the other countries, South Sudan looking towards getting power from other countries. So this particular framework is enabling us to pool resources, to share resources, therefore, with the need or with the goal of actually achieving the results. So number one is that the prioritization was done. And under what is called Pida project preparatory process, one was completed, and a number of countries did get support in terms of preparing their projects. And during the meeting that we had over the last week, was that found out that unless we prepare projects, we cannot be able to implement them. You have to prepare projects to get them ready for implementation, and at the same time considering that among the goals to be achieved in this particular Pida process is also to bring private sector on board.
Yes.
In terms of infrastructure investments, at the same time in terms of financing. Sometimes the government might not be having all the money, but might be looking forward to other financing instruments. And this is already happening. A number of projects are already being implemented in the continent. And as such, we believe that we are well on track. And the review that was now done under Pida PAP 2, a project appraisal process 2, for financing preparatory processes for projects, as well as getting financing for the implementation processes, has shown that there is good progress.
African countries have taken to implementing some very huge projects, Kenya included, and you've mentioned the issue of financing. Many African governments have had issues with budgetary constraints, as you've mentioned. So far, where are we accessing the extra funding that we need for these infrastructure projects? And a very important question, are we borrowing safely, so to say?
What I would like to say is that number one, financing is not confined to borrowing alone. There is financing that can be done in-house, in that you collect your revenue and you pay your bills.
Yes.
That is under budgeted frameworks. There is also the part that you also budget, but with borrowing. And you can borrow from local banks or local financial institutions. You can borrow from development partners. You can borrow from other international lenders in the market. You can do bonds. you can do all manner of arrangements. There are quite an array of them. You can equally invite private sector to come and invest in a project that you have prepared as a government, provided that it has what you can call a rate of return that is attractive to an investor. Because investors don't invest as social, social ventures, but they invest for returns. And I would like to say that so far, we are not, I wouldn't want to go into the debate of borrowing, whether we are borrowing safely or not. But any lender around the globe always give the conditions that are you going to be able to pay? And there is always a way in which that is measured. They look at, in terms of your revenues that are associated with the investment that you are undertaking, or other support mechanisms to enable you to pay. And these have always been evaluated and have always been found to be meeting the market demands. And as such, under those conditions, is therefore do provide for a mechanism for the country to borrow. But going forward, I would like to say that financing is not just being based on borrowing alone. We've seen a lot of countries now across Africa actually going for private sector investments. The countries prepare projects, then they undertake transaction advisory processes that enable private sector to compete favorably. So that, again, you do not have a private sector that is coming on board without competition or without appropriate understanding of the value for money. Then you end up losing as a country. So the processes that are understood and that are operational in the market are allowing us, therefore, to be able to evaluate the appropriate value for money from all types of investors. And this is taking place across the continent. It is not just an issue on the Eastern Africa side, but even if you go to the west coast of Africa, all the way to the north, many countries are undertaking projects together with private sector arrangements.
Africa is one of the, if it's not the most, the fastest growing region in the world globally. Yeah? So, attracting global investors, to invest in our infrastructure, what does it take, and are we packaging ourselves right?
I would like to say that we are packaging ourselves right. Number one, as a country. Number two, you do realize that countries have the regional economic blocks, and we are equally undertaking packaging and preparatory processes that give confidence to investors around our region. We are equally undertaking processes supported by continental institutions like the African Union, supported by the NEPAD, and the AU Commission, to be able to prepare a number of these projects. And we are also supported by the African Development Bank, which is the continental financier, also to buttress a number of preparatory processes. So I would like to say that, in a nutshell, we are well prepared as an investment platform. And the ongoing processes, I would like to say that right from the year 2012, 2013, the number of projects that have been financed by private sector are quite enormous. And we even still have other ventures currently ongoing in the continent, transactions taking place. Others have taken place and they are operational. Like if you look at even in the 6 ports of Nigeria, whether you are talking about the ports that have been leading, all of them, in fact, all the 6 ports have a Papa port, name it. They all have private sector investors. You go to Alexandria port in Egypt, there are current investors, and not just from one country, including China, Europe, name it, America. You can talk about the Middle East investors, the Japanese investors. You go to the port of Maputo, you find a mix of a number of investors from the Chinese to Europe. You go to you go to the port of Walvis Bay, you find an array of investors. You go to Tema Port in Ghana, you find an array of investors. You go to the port, Tangier Port in Morocco, it's one of the new ports in the continent, and you find an array of investors, including other added investment opportunities like industrial parks, special economic zones, among many others. Yes.
So when we talk about now, the private investors are doing their bit, as you said. There's the role of the governments now, the governments in place, and the political environment in African countries has to play a role in the implementation of these projects. So what is the role of the governments, and how are we doing on that bit?
I would like to say that no private sector can be willing to invest in a country if the government is not providing the right environment. And in every infrastructure project that is being prepared for private sector, there is always a risk analysis that is undertaken. Among them, or key among them, is the issue of analyzing the political risk event. That is the country ready politically, through its structures of governance, through its leadership, through its policies, through its regulations and laws, is it able to sustain and to support a private sector investor from inception to recovery of resources that have been invested and to continue the business?
By the National Assembly.
In the continent,
we recommend the Honorable Wandai and his team.
The countries are having...
Next to him is the Honorable...
They have appropriate policies in place, they have appropriate regulations in place, and they equally strive to undertake what we call a business competitiveness enhancement program. You've been hearing about what was called ease of doing business. Now, we've moved from ease of doing business to what we call now competitiveness. So in terms of improving competitiveness, you therefore reduce those particular elements that can actually lower a private investor's appetite for investments in the country. For example, Kenya, we have the PPP law that allows for a private sector investor to come and invest. We have even the Privatization Commission that allows does the investment of projects from the government portfolio to private sector portfolio. We have a number of regulations that also support private sector investments, including incentives that have been put to attract private sector investors.
Right. These are for projects that are maybe in a certain country. How about now for projects that span a whole region, like the LAPSET, which goes across a number of countries? How is that handled?
Yes, we do have a number of these projects across the continent. And you heard about the Trans-African highways, that have already been, you hear about the north-south, the east to west, like the LAPSET connects the east coast with the west coast. You have the West African corridor that also comes all the way from the Abidjan, all the way from Lagos, Abidjan, connecting all the way to the port of Dakar and also to the port of Tangier and going all the way to Alexandria. All these corridors traverse a number of countries. First of all, we are facilitated under the African Union. You will recall that in the year 2015, the LAPSET Corridor Program was admitted as a Presidential Infrastructure Championship Initiative project under the African Union. So far, there are about 10 of those kind of projects in the whole continent. They are just 10. And they are key to the integration of the continent. And as such, they are facilitated from that particular platform. And what I mentioned at the project appraisal process under Pida does allow countries to come together and get support to prepare the projects, as well as to finance the projects. So you find that a project that is coming from Kenya on the Kenyan side going into the Ethiopian side, and I want to give you a very good example. The Isiolo, Moyale, Hawassa, Addis Ababa Road was financed through a syndication framework by the African Development Bank. It was straddling across the corridors, across the two countries. And it's more or less now completed. Kenya already completed their 500 kilometers, and Ethiopia is at the final stages of completing their 500 kilometers. It allowed the two countries, therefore, to have a bilateral arrangement. So what usually brings the countries together to engage is that bilateral instruments are therefore signed between the countries, agreeing to cooperate in the process of planning, development, and operations of the particular infrastructure project. And you equally heard about the pipeline project that is supposed to come from South Sudan. You did see that there was a bilateral agreement that was being negotiated with the government of South Sudan. You've equally seen Kenya sign bilateral agreements on issues of energy and oil and gas to enable Kenya and Ethiopia to develop and operate, energy. What you call electricity transmission lines, tapping energy from the side of Ethiopia. And the same is happening to a number of countries. You have heard about the Inga project, the Inga Dam, which has been lingering on the continent's development table for quite a long time. At the moment, you see that it is coming to the table for transactions. It's equally moving into implementation. And the energy will not be consumed by Congo alone, but will actually be transmitted to many other countries in the region. As such, we are again brought together under what is usually also called the regional economic communities, like the East African community. You have projects which also come under COMESA. Like if we are sharing a particular infrastructure project with a country that is not within the East African community, then we look for one of the regional economic communities arrangements, like IGAD, COMESA, and the others, so that whichever country you therefore share one of those arrangements with, then and you intend to undertake a project, is therefore brought into that particular framework for cooperation. So the continental arrangements or the institutional arrangements that we have in the continent is number one. Number two is the country's ability to be able to commit themselves at bilateral levels, even trilateral levels, to cooperate in the development, in the planning and the development of the infrastructure projects is equally another thing. And then we have the development partner frameworks, such that when they are financing a particular project that is cross-border, they therefore have instruments that support that, like under the African Development Bank or even under the World Bank. They have what we call, cross-border project, frameworks, such that if you are looking for financing for a project that straddles one or two countries or more, two or more countries, you therefore have access to a particular and a specialized financing instrument that therefore allows you to seek for that particular support. Yeah.
I think those are some of the projects that you've mentioned that are doing really well, in terms of implementation. According to the NEPAD website, infrastructure development in Africa, the implementation is about 19%, while for health projects, it's about 74%. That means infrastructure has a long way to go.
Correct.
So what are some of these challenges that that sector is facing, and how can we surmount them?
Yes, during the last meeting that we had a few days ago here, and this was the first time when the Pida week was brought to East Africa, specifically to Kenya, we did see that, number one, preparatory processes for projects are actually a challenge to a number of countries. We are equally aware that a number of countries in the continent might also not be very stable politically, and so that has also been affecting some of the key infrastructure projects. The other bit is that whereas a project might be prepared for a government financing arrangement, but now when you want to move it to private sector financing or implementation arrangements, you therefore need to satisfy a number of private sector appetite elements for investment. And it was equally found that many countries do not have that capacity or the readiness to have the projects that they've already listed as priority projects to be ready for private sector uptake. And again, you did talk about issues of financing, particularly from borrowing. Countries are also limited with regard to how they can borrow. So again, if your borrowing is not allowing you to go a step further, to get more resources to be able to implement your project, then you also find that you still get stuck. But I would like to say that most of the large-scale projects that are cross-border actually have longer gestation period due to processes that are required for their preparatory, preparatory processes, as well as financing readiness. Yeah.
And for the financing bit that you've mentioned, project delays, at least as far as Kenya goes, are very rampant, you know. And how exactly can the African continent deal with this issue of project delays?
Of course, project delays are caused by a number of factors.
Okay.
Number one, if it is fully government funded, maybe it might be that the government is not raising enough resources. Number two, if it is for private sector, it might be that the private sector are not comfortable with the instruments that are supposed to be providing for comfort. I want to give you examples. When the government wanted to implement the expressway by around 2010, 2009, 2010, 2011, it was actually ready for signing of the contract. But the development partners involved said, let's take a step back because of a few issues which they thought they were not comfortable with, particularly with the people who are supposed to be implementing it, because it was supposed to be implemented by private sector. And at the same, actually, it's now even being implemented by private sector. So it's not a government borrowing. So you see, like that's a practical example that actually delayed the project from all the way from 2010 up to 2020, 21, 22. The other bit you've seen, we actually also having private sector implementing the highway from Nairobi, Nakuru to Mau Summit, and preparing a project for it to reach that level of implementation requires a lot of issues, particularly when private sector is involved. So every step has to be approved by the financiers. Every step has to receive the necessary instruments of support from government. So putting all this together is usually not very easy.
Okay.
Yeah, particularly for large-scale projects. So it is an issue of processes. And I think as we continue to go forward, the countries are getting more efficient. There is greater confidence that is now growing within the continent. Previously, there wasn't enough confidence, but now that there are projects that have been undertaken by private sector around the continent, and they seem to be gaining traction with regard to creating an environment for business, then private sector is starting to get that confidence.
All right.
Yeah.
We are having this conversation about infrastructure development in Africa and just what is ailing infrastructure development and also what is happening and what is good about it currently. We're having this conversation with Sylvester Kasuku, the CEO of Africa Center for Transport and Infrastructure. We want to take a quick break. When we come back, this conversation continues. Stay with us.
wrong, Pinky? Why are you sweating so much? You all right? Pinky.
Would I care? Just leave the past in the past. Jack and I have got a son. He's 5.
Can't leave.
You are no longer my husband. I don't need to listen to you.
We'll never marry you, all right? Never, ever. Make yourself aware of that.
Face is so pretty.
What are you doing? You're gonna leave all your money to Pinky, am I right?
How dare you? How dare you talk back, you...
Oh my God, honey!
In the future, we've got to stick together and live a better life.
Pinky and I are already divorced. She has nothing to do with me anymore. I only have one son right now, and he's Sean. I don't know why you're being so stubborn.
Are you with Pinky right now?
Listen, I'll talk with you later. I gotta go.
Helen, congratulations. You look amazing today.
I'm sorry. The bridegroom may be a bit late.
It's okay. He must be on the way.
Jack, be careful! Pinky doesn't know how to swim!
Jack,
hurry and save her!
Mimi na wewe tumemalizana. We are even now, right?
Nataka nipeleke kwa mamako. Kama yeye hataki kuniona basi mimi nataka kumuona.
Mimi pia nataka maisha mazuri. Teach me how to use it.
Uliniambia kwa kuna jambo napaswa kulijua. I'm listening.
No, Father, please. No. Nachotaka ni babako Father aje hapa kwa magoti.
Already.
Here on KBC Channel 1. Remember, today is World Kidney Day, and of course looking at just the challenges that people with kidney problems are facing, as well as the renal problems. And of course the Minister of Health, Kagwe, will be giving us a speech much later on. Purity Museo is on that bit, and we shall be expecting something from her. We also have the Law Society of Kenya having its elections at the Supreme Court grounds. Ben Troy Njue will be updating us on what is going on there. We shall be giving you that report in a little bit, but here in studio we are having a conversation about infrastructure development in Africa, and now we want to shift gears a bit to the Kenyan bit of the infrastructure. Sylvester Kasuku is my guest, and he's the Chief Executive Officer of Africa Center for Transport and Infrastructure. Thank you for staying with us.
Thank you.
Let us talk about how Kenya is benefiting from the Pida initiatives, please.
Yes, I would like to say that Kenya is benefiting from these initiatives in many ways. Number one, owing to the nature or the number of projects that are found within the Kenyan space, or projects that are emanating from the Kenyan space, connecting to other jurisdictions, as well as the role of Kenya within the AU framework with regards to championing leadership of project implementation. Number one, as I did say, that the LAPSAT corridor program is one of the 10 what we call the PICI, that is the Presidential Infrastructure Championship Initiative under AU, and the chairman of that particular committee, or the champion for that particular committee, is none other than our President Uhuru Kenyatta, who is actually the champion of the LAPSAT corridor program under AU. And because it straddles many other countries, he therefore takes leadership in terms of seeing how best this project is implemented across the continent.
Okay, allow me to cut you short there a little bit. You shall continue with your point in just a bit. We want to take you to the Milimani Law Courts, where the Lsk Elections press briefing is going on. Dunstan Omari is currently speaking. Let's just listen into that.
Yes.
You're doing a commentary about today's elections?
Yes. Yes, you're an aspirant, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Go ahead. Okay. Just in the
Yes.
Dunstan Omari there, just standing by. I think he'll be speaking in a little bit about the Law Society of Kenya elections. Bentro Enjoy is keeping an eye on that and will be updating us as we go on. We are here in studio talking about infrastructure development, and Sylvester Kasuku, the CEO of the Africa Center for Transport and Infrastructure, was telling us about how Kenya is benefiting from the Pida initiatives. Please go on.
Thank you very much. And so Kenya, being at the helm of the leadership of preparing and implementing these key projects in the continent, does give Kenya that particular, position of advantage with regard to receiving attention for the projects that it has, and also directing on how other countries that are connected to these projects can also come in and to support the development of the projects through their territories. I want to say that we know that the African continent is quite disadvantaged in terms of infrastructure. And the infrastructure deficit is actually costing the continent about 2% of its GDP. That's a loss per year. And it equally makes Africa not trade with itself. So the more we are implementing these projects, the more we are allowing Africa to trade. And as such, Kenya therefore becomes a prime location for promoting business within the continent. You know that a number of multinationals are also headquartered in Kenya. And as they expand their businesses, and as Kenyans continue to look for more businesses, then the expansion of these projects leads to the creation of more markets, or a bigger market for businesses in Kenya. So that's number one. Number two is that with regard to funding of projects, and I did say that there are frameworks that deal with projects that go beyond the country's boundary. And as such, the financing instruments that are therefore deployed to support these projects are therefore also accessed by Kenya. Like Kenya was supported under Pida PAP 1 and is also being supported under Pida PAP 2 with regard to these cross-border projects. Like you'll find the railway that is under LAPSET, the highways, the pipelines, among other projects, are actually being prepared under Pida PAP 2 in terms of design as well as in terms of financing for implementation. So that gives Kenya that advantageous position. The other bit is that there are many corridors that are actually emanating from Kenya. You have the north-south that crosses through Kenya. Then you have the LAPSET crossing through Kenya. Then you have the other corridor that goes all the way to, through Uganda, Congo, also going towards the western part of the continent. All these projects are key to Kenya's development. Then you also have the corridor that also comes from Turkana running through Isebania and the other one also running through Namanga. All these are key corridors that are supporting the continent in terms of regional integration. And as such, the regional integration being top on the agenda, Kenya's infrastructural bit, therefore, becomes a continental agenda, becomes a continental priority beyond the national priority that they are.
All right. We'll continue with this conversation in a little bit. Let's now take you to the Lsk Elections press briefing by Dunstan Omari. He's speaking currently. Let's listen into what he has to say.
For 20, 30, 40 years, Lsk was. There is the past 2 years, and that is the question people are asking. We lost our glory, and I hope all the people who are contesting are very good contestants, qualified advocates. They have exceptional skills of leadership, but only those ones that will get the majority votes will lead us. And we wish everybody who is in the ballot all the best. And once we conclude this election today, we'll move together as advocates of one family and to protect the rule of law in this country. Thank you.
What do you expect?
You can say also Saled.
Okay, perhaps my last question.
Yeah.
To restore the lost glory, what do the new office bearers need to do?
The new office bearers who will be elected today must bring everybody on board. We need to deal with our matters in the boardroom. We have no business dealing with our matters in the public spots that we have been seeing around. So lawyers are very intelligent people. We are the people who implement arbitration. We are the people who implement ADR. And therefore, we hope that once we get the new officials, they'll bring everybody on board and we move forward.
Thank you so much.
Bora. Sir. Thank you. See level.
Is lawyer Dunstan Omari there speaking about the LSK elections, the Law Society of Kenya elections that are happening. He says that they will be getting a new leadership today, and once they do that, they expect that the new leadership will unite the lawyers and to ensure that the issues they have will be dealt with in the boardroom and not in the public space as well. Ben Troinjo will be giving us a detailed report of how those elections go a little bit later. Now we come back to our conversation with Sylvester Kasuku, the CEO of Africa Center for Transport and Infrastructure Development. We are talking about Kenya benefiting from infrastructure development projects in the continent. And Kenya being the strongest economy in the Eastern Africa region, how does that position us to take advantage of these projects?
Number one, it is that our position in the region is that we are a hub. And to continue to be the hub, we must also strengthen our position with regard to attracting investors to come into the country and also being able to fast-track the implementation of these key projects. Then how, therefore, does this go? We know that we've put in place a number of laws, and one of the most progressive constitutions around the continent is the Kenyan Constitution that actually supports private sector investment. We also have policies that are very progressive, investment policies that also protect private investment interests in the country. We have our institutions of government, like the judiciary, that also is very strong with regard to protecting the private sector investors' interest. And what I mean by private sector interest in areas where government has a greater influence is that is not just private sector from outside the country, but even private sector within the country. Because should you need to have your investment safe, then you therefore need to look at institutions that will support your position, that will protect you. And this really is well enshrined within our policies, regulations, and laws. The other bit is that we are, therefore, as we continue to implement the projects, the benefit therefore come with a multiplier effect. For example, the Lamu port that is being constructed, although it is more or less through now with the first 3 berths, and the road infrastructure that is being constructed to connect it to the already existing network to Ethiopia and South Sudan, does provide a platform for private sector and private investors in Kenya and private Kenyan businesses to take advantage of the new investment platform that has been created, and therefore also to partner with other investors from other parts of the globe. Yes, rather than being importers of goods, we can now also move to the next stage of being producers of goods locally, and then to look for the market for the same goods that are produced here outside from outside the country. So what I would like to say is that there's a great deal of benefit that this brings to the country. Jobs creation is good for the youth in this country, and in terms of reducing the level of unemployment in the country. And you know that about over 70% of all unemployed in the country are actually the youth. So the more jobs we create, the more we create more opportunities for the youth in Kenya. We also are driving towards a position of, let's say, goods that are made in Kenya. For a long time, we have been importing even things we can make in Kenya. But now, using the infrastructures that are now connecting us to new markets, moving into production of these goods that are consumed within the country and within the region, therefore also gives us the opportunity to be able to move into industrialization faster and to be able to grow the market, the market quantities in terms of where we need to take the goods that we produce in the country. And our target should not just be the local market. alone. But we should look for markets outside the country as well.
Right.
Just like other countries where we import goods from have also captured our market.
Yes, that is very important. Most, or rather, infrastructure projects in the continent have been known to use the services of external contractors, or contractors from other countries, as opposed to local contractors. So how are these projects that we are implementing supporting the local market?
Yes, I would like to say that one of the problems that has always led to use of external contractors, or that is contractors that come from outside the continent, has actually been what I would like to say as a lack of capacity to handle large-scale infrastructure projects. Okay. Otherwise, if there was that large-scale capacity, then maybe local contractors would be handling. But the local contractors are not completely excluded. Sometimes lender rules, and I want us to take this seriously. Lender rules, people that are lending you money, also have conditions. That we give you money, we also need to see contractors from our country or from our region also benefiting. Like if you get money from Europe, from a European lenders, they'll most likely tell you to get, at least some of their contractors also to participate. But that doesn't preclude Kenyans from participating. And that's why you always see that local content being counted as part of the contract. The big guy gets the contract for purposes of large-scale mobilization and delivery and quality assurance, but our local contractors are also therefore subcontracted to deliver the same job. So as they continue to partner with these external contractors that come with certain lender regulations or lender demands, then you also find that our local contractors also continue to grow their capacity to deliver. And I think you can nowadays see many contractors, which are Kenyan contractors, participating in a number of infrastructure projects. So it's not just the guys or the big companies from outside the country that you see listed there at the top. But go below it and look at the array of contractors. Whether you're talking about civil works, whether you're talking about people doing electricals, whether you're talking about people doing mechanical, whether you name it, suppliers of materials. Materials are sourced from the local environment. Save for a situation whereby you might not find that material locally.
So you're saying the local people are not excluded?
The local people are not excluded. All the way from the supply of materials or inputs into the contracts, to jobs that are created, to contracts that are subcontracted, and also to skills that continue to be upgraded. Yes.
So at what point will we see the big guy being a local contractor?
We might not put a specific time scale on when the Kenyans can be seen to be the big contractors, but it's already happening. Yes, it's already happening.
All right.
A number of, like if you look at construction of buildings in town, you will find that a number of contractors are actually local, undertaking those construction works.
All right.
Yeah. Look at a number of roads that are being constructed in the rural areas now, or even some of the roads that are connecting major areas of the country. You find that local contractors are now undertaking those construction works. Yes.
Right. Let's talk about the digitization and maybe leveraging on the digitization that is very well developed in Africa, especially Kenya, in helping the infrastructure development grow. How are we leveraging on that?
Yes, during the last Pida meeting, which ended a few days ago, did show that digitalization in the continent is actually one of the major inputs towards integration of the continent. Whereas physical infrastructure might not allow us to be moving across borders. Like today, if somebody told you to drive to Ghana, you'd wonder where to pass. or that you drive to Namibia. You would start wondering how to go there. So what I would like to say is that where physical infrastructure is posing a constraint, the digital infrastructure is actually becoming an enabler for regional integration. We can be able to transact across borders. I've seen banks like Equity Bank now having digital transactions across the continent. Like you can transact with people in Congo, you can transact with people in West Africa while you are here in Nairobi, using the bank that you look at as a local bank. But again, what we are saying is that digitalization is actually also the digital economy is actually a new sector of the economy. And it is estimated by that by the year 2030, it could actually grow to 10% of GDP for African countries or for the continental economy. So that has also come in as a new input, as some sort of a shot in the arm for the African continent that has been lagging behind with regard to growth of physical infrastructure. Again, digitalization is enabling us to actually do more business within the continent with regard to enabling e-commerce. When we are able to actually, search for goods, undertake negotiations, and also procure goods and pay for the goods using digital platforms. This is actually going to enable us to do more trade within the continent.
All right.
And at the same time, the digital economy or digitalization is actually enabling our youth, the African youth, to be able to access opportunities beyond their own boundaries, beyond their own physical boundaries.
Right.
Yes.
Which of course has come into play, especially during the COVID-19 period when movement was hindered, Yes. So as we come to a close of this conversation, what is your outlook for African infrastructure and in Kenya, to be specific, maybe for the next 5-10 years or so?
Yes, what I would like to say is that going forward, we have done impressive work so far with the big push infrastructure, and that doesn't mean that now we stop. We'll still continue. However, we now need to move into the level of what we are calling deepening accessibility within the country. There are several parts of the country which are still finding it difficult to access markets, or you might find it difficult that even if there are goods or certain agricultural products being produced elsewhere, you might find it difficult to access them during certain seasons of the year. So what we need to do, therefore, is that within the country we should deepen accessibility to enable various regions to be able to produce whatever they are producing, to be able to reach markets, to be able to access inputs, to be able also to create more jobs, and to be able to attract better technologies of production, and also to spread industrial development beyond the cities.
Very important.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Asante sana.
I have been speaking with Sylvester Kasuku, the CEO of Africa Center for Transport and Infrastructure, and we have been talking about infrastructure development in Africa as well as in Kenya, and just what that looks for the country and the continent in the near future. And of course, it's important to ensure accessibility to even the most remote areas, to ensure growth of the economy and eventually the improvement of living standards of African people. Now, I want to leave you with the World Kidney Day celebrations that are going on at the Kenyatta National Hospital. Let us listen into what is happening there. When we come back, another conversation about oil and gas. Why is the cost of oil going up? Stay with us.
My name is Jean Banda. I'm the founder of Kenya Kidney and Lupus Foundation. As Dr. Mbogo has mentioned, my kidneys failed in the year 2000, and I have been a patient from 2000 to date. I did my transplant in 2006, and although I have lupus, and I know many lupus patients are hesitant in going for a transplant because they say, if lupus attacked the kidney, then surely if you transplant it will attack that kidney. I would like to encourage all of you to think of getting a transplant, be it that you have lupus, was the cause high blood pressure or whatever. I think a transplant gives one a fairly normal life. And as Gekonyo has said, transplant medication is very expensive, and that is what I would appeal for. Transplant patients really need help when it comes to taking the medication. Today, being a day after the International Women's Day, I would also like to donate some books. These are health related. They touch on the different aspects of living with end-stage kidney failure. However, the book is not just for patients. If you get an opportunity to read it, it'll benefit, I guess, everybody across the board. It gives us a chance to see this condition from a new lens, a new perspective. What do I mean new? Imagine, God forbid, if today, because they're testing us here, every single person here is told that they have kidney failure. All of you, even the doctors, life will definitely change. And the label will be the one with the kidney failure. So there are many issues that come up. It's a small book, and I'll donate 200 copies to the trustee, Professor McLean. Yeah, you come up.
You want to drop here? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Those things.
Come up beyond the podium.
Yeah.
Do you have a news story to share with KBC? Get in touch swiftly on email news@kbc.co.ke or call 0723-892-654 or 0734-780-124.
Mimi na wewe tumemalizana. We are even now, right?
Takunipeleke kwa mamako. Kama yeye hataki kuniona, basi mimi nataka kumuona.
Nipe nataka maisha mazuri. Teach me how to use it.
Uliniambia kwa kuna jambo napaswa kulijua. I'm listening.
No, Father, please, no. Nachotaka ni babako Father aje hapa kwa magoti.
In the future, we've got to stick together and live a better life.
Nikki and I are already divorced. She has nothing to do with me anymore. I only have one son right now, and he's Sean. I don't know why you're being so stubborn.
Are you with Pinky right now?
Listen, I'll talk with you later. I gotta go.
Helen, congratulations. You look amazing today.
I'm sorry. The bridegroom may be a bit late.
It's okay. He must be on the way.
Jack, be careful! Pinky doesn't know how to swim!
Jack,
hurry and save her!
Mimi na wewe tumemalizana. We are even now, right?
Takunipeleke kwa mamako. Kama yeye hataki kuniona, basi mimi nataka kumuona.
Nipe nataka maisha mazuri. Teach me how to use it.
Uliniambia kwa kuna jambo napaswa kulijua. I'm listening.
No, Father, please, no. Nachotaka ni babako Father aje hapa kwa magoti.
Thank you very much for staying with BizCheck here on KBC Channel 1. My name is Betty Kiptum. Now we want to proceed to our conversation of the second hour. It's matters oil and gas, and we just want to know what are your views on the increasing cost of oil in the country. But first, we want to take you to the Milimani Law Courts, where our reporters Sarafina Robi and Ben Troinjo are standing by to give us the latest on the Law Society of Kenya elections. Sarafina and Troy.
We're coming to you live from the Milimani Law Courts, as you said. And here are the Milimani Law Courts. The Lsk Elections have kicked off as we have been doing interviews with some of the candidates who are vying for different positions. The elections are being conducted by the IEBC and managed by a 7-board member of the Lsk that is being led by Senior Counsel Jan Mohamed Zehrabu. And also there are so many candidates vying for different positions, including the position of the president, the vice president, and different representatives, as well as a female representative to the Judicial Service Commission. Well, my colleague Ben Troy has been speaking to some of the candidates here at the Milimani Law Courts, and they have been sharing their views, different views of how they intend to manage the Lsk should they win these positions, given that there have been wrangles at the previous Lsk, and given that the president through the court was removed, and we have been having a caretaker president who is Linda Kiome, and we have been able to see that she's also vying for a position of a representative in the current elections that are going on here at the Milimani Law Courts. We've spoken to some of the candidates, including one of the candidates who is vying for the president position. Remember, we have 5 candidates vying for that position, and that was Eric Theory. Now we're going to speak to one of my colleague Ben Troy to just tell us more of what Theory said, or what he seeks to bring to the Law Society of Kenya.
Indeed, it's a big day for the lawyers, indeed, for over 18,000 lawyers in the country. And this exercise, remember, this exercise is being conducted in various high courts in Kenya. And as you can see behind us, there are the polls themselves, the polling stations are behind me, and the boxes, the 9 boxes themselves. And perhaps to touch on some of the aspirants or some of those vying for these positions, they include Nairobi branch Chairman Eric Theory, former Vice President Caroline Kamende, former Treasurer Bernard Kipngetich. We have Matthew Nyabena and Omwanza Ombati. Those are going for the top seat. Of course, there are various positions up for grabs, including that of the women representative at the JSC, the male representative at the JSC. And we're expecting, as we had alluded to earlier, is that the exercise will continue as smoothly as it is. And now I'm joined by Eric Theory live, who is gunning for the top seat, who wants the president seat, and perhaps he can touch on some of the agendas and how to bring back the fire that was LSK. Eric Theory, karibu sana.
Asante sana.
Indeed, we had a conversation earlier, but for our live audience, kindly tell us some of the how the exercise, begin with how the exercise has been so far, and what we expect from the new office bearers, reminding us that we need to get the fire back at LSK.
Thank you. We started off very well. Voting has opened across the entire country. All the stations are open, and advocates are streaming in to vote. So we are hoping that the process is going to be completed smoothly. So far, no hitches, and so we are glad about that. We also have noted a slightly lower turnout than in previous cases, but we are hoping it's because advocates are still in court, and we expect that beginning around noon, the turnout will increase. So we just want to urge those that have not voted to come out and exercise their civic duty, because we need to vote for purposes of getting in the new leadership. We have a task. The new leadership that gets into office has a task to heal and bring the society together. We have had a bit of acrimony within the council, which has even led to a very acrimonious exit of the former council. As you are aware, the powers of the president of the Law Society and its council are now being exercised by the branch chair's caucus and the chair of the caucus. But that is now in the past. The most that we can do is to learn the lessons which we got from that administration, and hopefully the new leadership that will come into place would then move to heal the divisions and also ensure that we reclaim, so to speak, our position as leaders in shaping opinion, especially on matters relating to rule of law and the administration of justice.
Indeed. And earlier you have talked about rebuilding the trust that was there and making it a little bit easier for young advocates who are entering into the job market or into the law, into law practice. Can you touch on that?
Yeah. What we've noticed over the last few years is that there is an increasing gap, rather a divide between the younger members of the society and the older members of the society. And that restlessness can be attributed to the difficult period we've gone through. The COVID period was caused us quite a bit of concerns in terms of business, and there was loss of employment opportunities. But also the increase in the number has meant that the opportunities to mentor, which has always been a tradition of the Law Society, to mentor the younger members so that then they are able to be well trained on the craft of the legal profession, because there is the practice of law, but there is also the business of law. So what we've noticed is that there's been a gap in terms of the business of law, which is something that is obtained through experience, and ideally for the younger members then is passed on from the older members through mentorship. So those are some of the initiatives that we hope that we can be able to implement so that we can begin to lower that gap. And also, the acrimony that has existed in the council has created a level of distrust between the membership and its leadership, and we are hoping that we can then be able to have this opportunity to bring the country, to bring the membership together. And that is a task that is on whoever will win the leadership of the Law Society.
Indeed. And there are proposals that LSK as a society should be involved more when the government is signing any contract or any agreement with partners or other countries, so that there's more transparency and accountability when it comes to public funds, and also accountability when it comes to government.
Yeah, indeed, it's true. And you see, we are blessed as a society because we have a lot of experts in international financial flows. We have a lot of experts on international trade. And that is expertise that can be made available to the government, so that as we are negotiating trade agreements, as we are negotiating bilateral lending agreements, we are able to bring in a level of transparency into the same, and be able to boost the capacity of the government to also negotiate deals that are favorable to the country, and also ensure that there is transparency in the negotiations of those deals, because ultimately we all recognize that the government is not doing or engaging in those discussions for itself, but it is for and on behalf of the Kenyan public. And so that there is a need to ensure that when that is done, it is done for the good of the country. And the only way we can do that is if we are able to bring in our expertise in our process, so that we are sure that the deals that are negotiated then are negotiated for the good of the country. We also need to work with Parliament to ensure that the reporting mechanisms to Parliament and the oversight function of Parliament with regards to those multilateral deals is also enhanced, so that there is that aspect of proper checks and balances within the government. Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you so much. But just in less than 5 seconds, big task, without campaigning, big task for the new office bearers. What are some of the 3 main issues?
That is Ben Troinjo, our reporter, engaging one of the lawyers there at the Law Society of Kenya Elections. It's happening at the Milimani Law Courts, and of course some of the issues that they're hoping will be dealt with by the new leadership include bridging the gap between the older generation of lawyers and the younger generation, as well as eliminating distrust between the membership of the LSK and its leadership. Ben Troinjo and Serafina Ruby are following up on those elections and will be giving us a detailed report on what happens in the elections. We now want to come to our studio interview here. We want to have a conversation about the oil and gas, the increase in prices of oil and gas. Why is this happening, and what does the future look like? To have this conversation is Mwendi Anyaga. He is the founder of Oil and Energy Service Limited. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Betty.
Right, let's just start with the issues surrounding the cost of oil, and let's start globally. I mean, some things are beyond our control, you know. Let's start with the global trends that are going on right now, starting with the Russian-Ukraine war. Come on.
Thank you. I think even before I go to the Russia-Ukraine war, there's a little bit of background.
Sure.
In that we all watched in 2020 when the price of oil was said to have gone to zero internationally, to $0 per barrel.
Yes.
Of course, that was the effect of the coronavirus. And the coronavirus, what it did was it led to a significant and sudden drop of the oil consumption globally, because people stopped traveling and stayed at home, and flights stopped flying and all that. So since then, the world has then been recovering. Of course, 2020 was almost all down, but in 2021, there were several times when recovery was seen. And so the oil consumption started to increase again. And it started in later 2021. The oil consumption started to go back to the levels where it was in 2019. Now, unfortunately, a lot of production had been withdrawn from the system, especially in the US, because in the US, where they do the shale oil, wells don't produce for too long. You have to keep drilling many wells continuously. Now, when the oil prices fell and the demand also fell, all those rigs were withdrawn and they were parked. They stopped drilling. So oil production in the US went down, and you could not lift it like with a switch. So towards the end of 2021, what we saw was an increase in demand, which was not completely matched by an increase in production. And that was also affected by the action that was being taken by the OPEC and by extension also the OPEC Plus group, which controlled how to increase the supply during this period of increasing demand. So that already led to a gradual but very sustained increase in oil prices. So by the end of 2021, oil prices were already high. Kenyans did not feel them as much because the government in October took a decision to cushion Kenyans against those prices by using the stabilization fund that had been accumulated over a period of time. Now come 2021, this trend was expected to continue. And it would have continued as a gradual increase. Of course, it's anyone's guess where it would have ended, but a lot of analysts and experts thought we will be averaging between $80 to $100 a barrel for the rest of 2022 and into 2023 and probably 24. And then now here comes the Russian crisis, where Russia decides to attack or invade Ukraine. When something like that happens, already the balance between demand and supply was very, very thin. And that was already causing jitters in the market. But I think most people in the industry believe that that balance can be maintained over a period of time as long as there's continued also gradual investment. Now, when this war came, even before the invasion actually happened, the market became very jittery and the prices started to go up. So first is just the imagination of how many barrels would be withdrawn in case some supply routes are closed and then the oil from Russia will not be able to go to a lot of places in the world. Russia currently, or let me say before the war, Russia was supplying 10% of the world's total oil consumption. And so is Saudi Arabia, and so is US. The three of them, each of them almost supply about 10% of the global oil demand. So imagining that supply from a 10% supplier can be interrupted already pushed the prices high. Now, and then as that was going on, the next bombshell was US to start saying that it is considering stopping the imports from Russia. Now, Russia does not supply a lot of oil to the US. It's basically about less than perhaps 3% of their total consumption today. However, they supply some quality of oil that is needed by the US refineries. And the only alternative source is not a beautiful source for the US, because the alternative sources of that quality of oil is Venezuela, it is Iran, or Saudi Arabia. Now, that already meant that if you withdraw 10% of the US supply, the next source of the quality that is required by the US refineries was also going to be a difficult one. Because Venezuela has the issues it has with the US, has been on sanctions for long. Iran has been on sanctions for long from the US. So they first have to negotiate around those sanctions.
Before they get to the oil supply.
Exactly. And Saudi has not in the recent past been the darling that it has historically been for the US, and has actually been forging friendships and alliances with Russia. So those three sources meant that these withdrawn oil imports into the US are not going to find an easy replacement. And then, of course, if you stopped Russia from exporting oil to the rest of Europe, then that meant you're creating a bigger supply gap, which then means basically the prices can only go high. So they have hit the highest, I think, yesterday. They have been going down today, but again, that could be just a correction, so we don't know where they will go after that.
Of course, the highest figure there is $135 per barrel.
Yes, that's true for the Brent crude.
Giving us that background, it's very important. But when we talk about the withdrawal of, purchase of oil from Russia by US and maybe even parts of Europe, who are going to be the first casualties of this problem, this crisis?
Well, I was thinking about that and wondering if US and Europe stop buying oil from Russia, because US already made an announcement now. UK has also made an announcement. The European Union has said they are considering, and in fact they have also announced that whatever action they take today, they are working towards weaning themselves out of dependence from the Russian oil and gas supplies by the end of 2022. Now, these economies are quite heavily dependent on oil. I know there's the whole energy transition going on, but today they are still very heavily dependent on oil. I would expect that US and Europe are consuming perhaps upwards of 40% of the total oil consumption in the world. Now, if you withdraw them a major supply like they get from Russia, they have to get this supply from somewhere else. And for your information, Russia today exports only is covering about 7% of the total oil exports. Of course, quite a bit of that is going to the east, to China and the rest. But my expectation would be that they will find an alternative source. That is why President Biden is said to be making calls to Venezuela. Venezuela is supplying China with a lot of oil right now. He's making calls to Saudi, and he's making calls to the United Arab Emirates, and he's also sent an emissary to contact Iran. So if they get oil from these alternative sources, the whole world supply chain of oil will have to rebalance. So the big question is, who is at the bottom of the pyramid as far as the negotiation power is concerned?
Yes.
I don't want to say it's Eastern Africa, but Eastern Africa also has no oil production at all. There's a little bit in South Sudan, but where is it exported through? It goes to the Red Sea, so it's already in the Middle East by the time it gets into the international supply routes. It's not in East Africa anymore. So there is actually a possibility that for no fault of our own, Eastern Africa could be one of the people who might have to go out begging for supply and taking the breadcrumbs, taking what remains, and perhaps a little bit more of the developing world. I say this because of also the knowledge that the international trading for oil, gas, metals, grains is also quite strongly controlled by Western companies. So it may also be okay to expect that they will ensure that our home is supplied first before we then send the barrels to anywhere else. So the possibility of us struggling not only with high oil prices, but also with limited supplies is actually there. And how that can be handled, I really don't know, but that's really need to be seen as a possible outcome.
Even before the Russia-Ukraine crisis came in, Kenyans were already complaining of high cost of energy. Those are the factors that are beyond our control, but there are some that increase the prices of this oil and gas within our borders, like the taxes and levies, and a lot of conversation has been had about this almost doubling the cost, from the landing cost to what the retail price is. It's almost double. So how is Kenya handling it currently, and what is in the near future? I mean, 14th is not far away. They're going to announce new prices on 14th night. I mean, on 14th, so what is in the offing for Kenya?
Okay, first, again, another step back. And you're right, Kenyans have been complaining a lot about the high cost of energy. And in Kenya, almost, when you mention energy, people think electricity. And this is a discussion that we had most of 2021 about how to reduce the cost of electricity. This debate was entered into back in 2014, and actually some actions set in motion. I may not comment on whether those actions did gain a lot or bring a lot of gains or not, but the whole of last year and perhaps also continuing to happen now is that there's a lot of this discussion, and one of our biggest problems currently is that we are still generating electricity from petroleum. And I brought that up because the same discussion we're having about petroleum is going to come back to bite on the electricity side.
Yes.
Because so far we've not managed to bring our country to a level where, despite having very significant geothermal resources and also the hydropower that has been available for some time, and of course the solar and wind power that has been getting installed quite consistently, I must say. But we've still not been able to wean ourselves out of the generation of electricity from oil. So the price of oil, as it goes up, is going to directly affect the cost of generating electricity for the people. Now, how the government will handle that, I don't know, but I just know that somebody has to pay the bill for that.
And most probably it will be the consumer.
Most probably it will be the consumer because usually when you consume, you pay. And subsidies are not necessarily usually very popular, especially when they appear to be a consistent subsidy. Now, coming back to the price of oil, when from around 2015, the price of oil started to come down globally. And again, it came down to a level where I think the price at the pump was so good. I could see people on social media saying, I've just filled my car with half the money that I used to spend like back in 2008. 2008 was probably the highest that we had seen before today. I think the government also found an opportunity to do a couple of things. And the two most significant ones that I do know is that there was some doubling of what you call the road maintenance levy. A very important levy because it keeps our roads fixed. And perhaps most Kenyans can say we have less potholes today than we used to have some years ago. But the road maintenance levy was doubled during that time. And then later, the VAT was introduced. And I know there was quite a bit of pushback from consumers on the VAT. And so instead of 16%, we ended up with 8%, but it was still put there anyway. Now, these led to quite a significant increase in how much the taxes and levies amounted to as a contributor to the total price. Now, those taxes and levies are still there. Of course, you do know that once you put the taxes and levies, then the person carrying out the budgeting exercise will budget for them, and it's easier said than done that they can be removed tomorrow. The contribution of the oil taxes and levies to the revenues at Treasury must be something significant. So that continues even when the international oil price increases. And so what Kenyans are likely to see, I can't predict what will happen next week because I also do know that there's a historical update to how these prices are calculated. It's not the prices of today that affect what is announced as a price change tomorrow. It's somewhat historical. But the government would probably have to dig deeper, much deeper, if it will be able to maintain prices at the level that it has kept them since October last year.
This conversation, very important conversation about the cost of oil and gas continues in just a little bit. We want to take you to Bomas of Kenya, where the United Democratic Movement is having its national delegates conference, and the former Premier Raila Odinga is speaking currently. Let's listen into he has arrived and he will be speaking during that particular conference. Let's just listen into what is going on at the UDM NDC.
UDM chama namba moja, UDM chama chetu Kenya halisi saidio, wilaya zote, kaunti zote, UDM chama namba moja.
Asanteni.
Kina mama, UDM chama chetu Kenya.
You can now sit. I invite only these four. Sawa, tukae.
Ni chama namba moja Kenya cha watu wa tabaka zote, wafugaji, wakulima,
wafugaji na wakulima, UDM chama namba, UDM chama chetu Kenya halisi saidia wote, wilaya zote, kaunti zote, UDM chama namba moja, akina mama na kina baba, UDM chama chetu.
The United Democratic Movement National Delegates Conference there at the Bomas of Kenya happening, and the former Premier Raila Odinga is already present there, and we shall be patching our signal to that particular conference when he starts to speak. But here in studio, we're having a conversation about the cost of oil and gas in the country, and we're having this conversation with Mwendi Anyaga. He's the founder of Oil and Energy Services. Thank you very much for staying with us. We were talking about the taxes and levies in the country and just how they impact that particular cost of oil. Now, what is the impact of increased cost of oil? Because Kenyans have been posting their shopping lists, their bills online and just complaining. I mean, with 1,000, this is what I get. With 7,000, this is all I get. So how does the cost of energy translate to the cost of living?
Well, I think the first one I mentioned is there's a direct contribution of oil to the cost of electricity. So first, the cost of generating electricity will obviously go up to the extent that we are going to continue using petroleum for generating the electricity that we need. And so that becomes a direct effect. I don't know again how the government intends to handle it, but somebody has to foot the bill. So you either foot the bill on your tab, or maybe pay more taxes somewhere else, or maybe suffer from not having some services. There has to be an effect somehow. But now, on top of that, this is the contribution to petroleum as an enabler of a lot of things that people do. Now, you might have heard, Betty, that last year there was a significant, rather drastic increase in fertilizer prices.
Yes.
I know the people talking out there, they're of course happy to blame the government of the day. But the truth of the matter is that there was, for the second half of last year, some kind of energy crisis in Europe, where the supply of gas, natural gas, which is petroleum, was in short supply. And then they were looking forward to a colder winter than they expected, meaning they needed more natural gas to supply energy during the winter season. And that shortage of natural gas led at some stage to what was said to be 600% increase in the price of natural gas. That, of course, was not felt directly here in Kenya. We don't use natural gas. It's mainly used in other places, but very significant to power generation. And number two, a much higher proportion than anything else, production of fertilizer in the world is actually done from natural gas. The conversion of natural gas to the ammonia and whatever else input that is required in the production of fertilizer. So already the price of fertilizer went up, at least doubled during last year. I'm a tea farmer, so I use fertilizer. I know we could get fertilizer for 2,400 shillings, but today, if you check randomly, you'll get it for between 5,000 and 6,000. It is nothing that anybody has done here in Kenya or not done. It's something that has already happened globally. Now, with what's happening today, what do we expect? The crisis, the natural gas crisis in Europe, will certainly increase. That means Europe is going to continue to need natural gas supply from many other sources other than Russia. In fact, Germany has been complaining that the pipe is pumping backwards. That the pipe from Russia, instead of pumping gas to the west, it is now pumping to the east. And whereas there is not a significant connection of a pipe natural gas supply between Russia and China, it is also known that quite a bit of the gas is now starting to go to the Southeast Asia. Now that will lead to continued increase in prices of natural gas, and that contributes to many things, mainly fertilizer and many other things that are produced in petrochemical plants. I'm sure what you're wearing there today, what I'm wearing here today, has some contribution from petroleum. So there. But now coming back here, of course, we are using vehicles for transport. Borders for transport. Industries are needing energy. They will either use electricity or they are using petroleum directly. So this is a significant input to the cost of production. It is then generally acceptable to expect that prices of everything will go up. Now, this will include food. And thinking about food specifically is that first, the price of fertilizer has not just gone up, it has been high, and it will continue to go up. What happens to the farmer?
The CS of Agriculture said that if subsidies are not provided by Treasury, it will hit around 7,000 shillings.
You see? You see? And even 7,000 could be another statement, depending on how this crisis in Eastern Europe evolves. Now, farmers will first practically be unable to buy the fertilizer. Those who buy will put it in their costing. But perhaps we better worry about those who don't buy first. Because what's going to happen? Their production will reduce.
Will go down,
When their production reduces, then there'll be generally a reduced supply of food. I don't want to say there will be shortage, but simple laws of demand and supply, they dictate that when demand remains high and supply goes down, the prices are going to go up. So I think Kenyans also need to brace for increasing prices of food. I know we like to blame a lot of people when these kind of things happen, but whatever is happening globally today will almost certainly lead to an increase in the prices of food locally.
Right, which is quite unfortunate, really. I mean, Kenyans were just coming out of the impact of the pandemic and trying to regain their footing, and then this happens.
I know, it's... well, sometimes people say that's how life is. You know, you almost move from one crisis to another, but the pandemic was a major crisis, has affected people very negatively, the businesses. And now you come to this. I think the crisis of Russia and Ukraine will affect people in very, very many ways. It doesn't matter whether you park your car at home. It doesn't matter whether you work from home and are not traveling a lot. But we have to brace ourselves.
Brace for tough times.
Yeah.
The manufacturing sector in Kenya, I mean, it has been complaining for the longest time about the high cost of energy, which impacts the production cost, and eventually the cost is passed to our goods, making most of Kenya's locally produced goods uncompetitive in the regional or even global market. So in this crisis, I mean, we were already struggling to make our products competitive. What happens now that we are being hit harder?
Well, a bit of reprieve is that whatever is happening globally will affect everybody.
Yes.
However, we also do know that we are competing perhaps with others who may have maybe perhaps more stable, say, power generation environment. When we talk of countries like Europe, Europe has quite a bit of locally produced natural gas, for example. But just like we have said about the people, I think the industries will also have to face the same effect. I'm also in the logistics industry, and one of the things that we have to think about, I mean, today, the diesel would contribute about 50 to 60% of the cost of transportation of commodities across the country in Kenya, whether that commodity is sugar, whether it's fertilizer, whether it's maize or wheat, whatever is being transported around, name it. Now, if this cost goes up, what's then going to happen? The cost of transportation will go up. So what's going to happen to the, say, even like the retailers, they'll have to also have to pump up the prices. The manufacturers have to bring in the inputs to their factories. So they will pay higher for petroleum, and they will pay higher for energy, unless, like I said earlier, the government is able to subsidize. How much it is able to subsidize is probably not in my domain to discuss, but I do know that when you have a limited pass, you also have limited options on how you can actually spend it. So the manufacturers will have to also bear higher costs of manufacturing, which means they'll have to increase prices, which might mean to a certain extent they continue or they get more uncompetitive, but they can take reprieve in that the global happenings are affecting even their competition. Yeah.
When we look at the issues of supply now, Africa has quite some oil deposits, you know, and produces a lot. But over the years, it has been viewed as a curse to the countries that these deposits are found in, as opposed to being a blessing. How can Africa move from that position to somehow cushioning itself from such kind of crisis?
Again, I will set just a little bit of context.
Sure.
Yeah,
it's important.
In that, at some stage, Africa was producing approximately, again, 10% of the total world oil supply, and consuming a very, very small proportion out of that. Most of it gets exported. But some events which are almost unexplained, we have seen reduction in production across a number of major producers. Now in West Africa, Angola and Nigeria have been major suppliers of oil, producers of oil. At some point, Nigeria was producing upwards of 2 million barrels of oil per day, and Angola was producing upwards of 1.5 million barrels per day. These countries have faced continued reduction in production, and they have also continued to face continued reduction in investment for future production. Now, perhaps the case that is clear on what happened is Libya. Because Libya, arising from the, I think, happenings of 2011 or somewhere out there, the ousting of President Gaddafi, and Russia has been in crisis since then. A country that was producing, I think, 2.5 million barrels per day is today producing 500,000 barrels per day. Other large producers like Algeria, Egypt, Tunisia have been less affected. But these three have been main producers of oil. The others I've mentioned are more of gas producers than actually oil producers. So we are having Africa in a state right now where it's producing so much less oil than it has historically produced, and has also had so much less investment for future production than has actually happened.
Okay.
Now, you would hope that this would be a time to revamp all this. But unfortunately, funding is now a problem for oil production because of the energy transition that is taking place. So I've even seen it being argued somewhere else, and thanks to Africa Energy Chamber, which has been advocating for Africa to consider setting up financing facilities for oil producing facilities, because financing from a lot of bilateral funders outside Africa is now becoming very, very limited. But Africa has perhaps the largest stock of unproduced and sometimes also undiscovered resources. Like Eastern Africa probably has quite a significant stock of undiscovered resources, and those which have been discovered have not been produced. Mozambique produces a trickle of gas, but if you look at how much they have discovered and are not producing today, is some kind of world-class reserves. Tanzania, the same, has large gas discoveries. It's not producing most of it. It's producing just a small volume for local use in power generation and some other industrial activities. The story about Kenya, I'm sure you know, we were about to start producing, but we still are not there. Uganda, same case. Uganda discovered oil a long time ago, but it's not producing. DRC prides itself to potentially having the largest volume of undiscovered oil in their internal basins in DRC. I mentioned DRC because we border with it just here in Eastern Africa.
They're about to join the EAC.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good thing. It's a big country with a big population. So I think again it will be a wake-up call for Africa on for how long will our continent be an owner and producer of raw materials and so many other natural resources, but yet continue to suffer in times of global crisis like this. We can't really make use of the resources that we have. So it's kind of a wake-up call, and everyone has to think that if I'm not going to get support globally to increase production for those who already have production, or to develop production for those who would like to develop, then what else should we do? Perhaps Africa again needs to think as a group.
I mean, there have been quite some eye-opening moments for Africa in the recent past. COVID did the same thing with the manufacturing sector, you know, the overdependence on imports. Just looking internally and seeing what the local manufacturing sector can do. Maybe that is something that the oil production sector can also do. What will it take?
It takes policy, it takes skills and money. Why do I say policy? It's because sometimes when you have policy support for some certain projects, for example, you've seen President Museveni in Uganda almost bend over backwards to get the oil project going. And at some point, he had to convince the leadership in the country to forego very significant amounts of taxes that they were demanding from the oil companies, so that the oil companies can be left free to go to the next stage of development. It is almost clear that that is going on now and working. Of course, Uganda has been working with Tanzania a lot, and the president in Uganda also taking the lead to negotiate with Tanzania about the pipeline. I think in all countries, the policy direction and the governments deciding to take some level of charge to get this going is important. Again, we've seen it in Tanzania when President Suluhu Hassan took over. The gas project was considered dead. In fact, Norway, a company in Norway wrote off $900 million from their balance sheet. And that was money invested in Tanzania. And they said, we can't see this project going on. We are going to write these off. We'll wait and see what happens in future. Now, the current president in Tanzania led the government team and perhaps instructed them to reach out to those companies and say the Tanzania government wants to talk to them again. Now it's looking like it's coming back on course. It's looking like it's coming back on course. Now, what has stopped the gas development in Mozambique is, I can't even call it civil war, because it's something much smaller than that. But there's some insurgents somewhere towards the neighbor of Tanzania who have made it very difficult for the oil companies to operate, to build a project that would, as at last year, have been the largest foreign direct investment in a single project in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa.
Right. Allow me to cut you short there. We want to proceed to the UDM NDC that is happening at Bomas of Kenya. The Premier Raila Odinga is speaking currently. Let's just listen in to what is happening there.
Hoi! Asante sana. Wana UDM, salamu alaikum rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Wanasema leo ni leo, msema kesho ni. Mimi nilikuwa na mkutano na gavana Roba. Akaniambia atio Juma Alhamisi utakuwa wapi? Nikamwambia Alhamisi nitakuwa Meru. Akaniambia tutakuwa na kongamano ya chama chetu cha UDM. Kama naweza tu kupita kwa dakika chache tutafurahi. Nikamwambia nitajaribu. Na sasa nimekuja. Na sikujua yale ambayo yatafanyika hapa. Mimi nikuja tu niingie namna hii, niangalie nyinyi, niseme jambo na nitoke. Lakini sasa mimi nimeshangazwa kwa yale ambayo mmefanya. Kwa kupitisha kwa kauli moja, atamuniunga mimi mkono kwa kinyang'anyiro cha ambayo inakuja tarehe 9 mwezi wa 8 mwaka huu kama candidate wenu. Sawa? Na tema shukrani. Shukrani sana kwenu. Kwa kimila yetu sasa nyinyi mmepata mimi ngao na mkuki. Ni bebe. Nataka kwa kichania kwamba hii ngao haitakuja kuguza mguu yangu. Unajua wanasema Wajaluo nasema saa nyingine unapatia mtu ngao lakini ni mzito sana kwake. Hana nguvu, akibeba namna hii napiga mguu yake. Hiyo ni mtu hafai. Nasema huyu generali mpatie ngao atabeba kikamilifu. Sasa hao wote ni watu tumekuwa nao, watu yangu, vijana yangu hapa. Umeona huyu gavana Mahmud, huyu alikuwa vijana yangu. aliwaria huyo pako nyuma hapo, huyo mwanafunzi yangu ya kisiasa kabisa. Siasa iko na hii namna hii, sangine mnatembea namna hii, njia sangine napanda, mwingine ameenda kushoto, mwingine kulia, kule mbele mnakuja kukutana tena. Tumekutana tena sasa. Mimi nasema ati wanasema the best time is God's time. This is the God's time. Imefika wakati huu. Sasa mimi najua sana shida ambayo iko eneo ambao mnatoka huko. Wafugaji ni watu muhimu zaidi. Ufugaji kitu muhimu sana, pastoralism. Na naweza kupatia nyinyi mfano ya kwamba nchi moja kule Afrika Kusini inaitwa Botswana. Kwa muda mrefu sana, kama walikuwa hawajapata ile almasi, walikuwa wanategemea mfugo peke yake, na uchumi yao ilikuwa inang'ara. Inawili ilikuwa one of the most successful economies on the African continent, na ufugaji tu. Kwa wakati walikuwa wanaanza, walikuja hapa Kenya kwa mafunzo. Walikuja hapa wakapeleta kule KMC Athi River, waone vile KMC inafanya. Walipotoka hapa wakarudi kwao kule Botswana, wakaenda wakaunda BMC, Botswana Meat Corporation. Wakati mimi nilienda huko, mahali inaitwa Lobatse, nikaingia huko, nilikuwa nimeshaingia hapa ya Athi River. Nikakuta ile kiwanda walikuwa nayo kule ilikuwa ni mara 3 kushinda hii yetu ya Athi River hapa. Na walikuwa wanachinja mifugo, nyama wanauza hapa Afrika Kusini, ngine wanapeleka Ulaya na wanapeleka kule Marekani. Na uchumi yao ilikuwa inanawiri Botswana. Na Botswana ni jangwa. Pale kwa yake iko ile Kalahari desert. Sio hata kama hapa kwetu. Hapa jangwa yetu ni kidogo, na inaitwa Chalbi kule Marsabit peke yake. Yale ambayo wamefanya ni wamevuna maji, wamejenga mabwawa pale ambayo mvua ikinyesha wanavuna maji. Wakati wa kiangazi iko na maji ya kutosha kwa mifugo, na chakula vile vile wanaweka ya ng'ombe, ili kama sasa nyasi imenyauka, iko chakula ya ng'ombe, mifugo haikufi huko. Nikaangalia nikasema sisi tunaweza kutumia mbinu kama haya ya Botswana hapa kwetu, na hii itakuwa suluhu ya kudumu hapa kwa shida ya hapa wafugaji wetu. Watu ambao wako na mifugo ng'ombe kama 1,000 mtu mmoja, hata ikana hawa ni wafukara, wako na mali, na hiyo mali inaweza kuwatajirisha wao. Kwa hivyo sisi tunaweza, kama kuna nia kuna njia, panaponia. Na hii mfugo yetu tunaweza kuwa nazo. Tunajenga viwanda vya kuchinja na vile vile mpango ya kusafirisha iende katika soko zingine. Jana tulikuwa kule Wajia iko na kiwanda kubwa ya ndege. Ile ndege kubwa ya kubeba bidhaa zinaweza kuwa pale, zinachukua nyama kutoka hapo inapeleka katika soko kule Emirates, ngine kule Saudia, ngine kule Ulaya kila siku. Na hiyo itapeleta pesa mingi zaidi kwetu. Italeta pesa mingi zaidi, tunaweza kufanya haya yote. Mambo ya maji ni muhimu sana. Kule Wajia ni maji, shida ya maji. Na tunaweza kule Garissa iko maji, maana yake Mto Tana iko kule. Tunaweka pomba ya maji kutoka Mto Tana tunapeleka mpaka kule Wajia. wanakuwa na maji ya kutosha. Tunajua shida eneo ya kama Marsabit, tunajua mingi sana ambayo wako nayo. Tumeongea na gavana, najua shida ya Mandera, tunajua. Lakini nasema sisi wa Kenya tunajua tumetoka wapi, tuko wapi, tunataka kuelekea wapi. Kwa muda mrefu eneo hii juu yote ilikuwa imewekwa special operation zone. Tulipoenda Mandera 1992 ulikuwa kama umeenda nchi ya kigeni. Askari wako pale na jungle fatigue. Unaenda kwa hoteli unaambia DC amekataa utoke kwa hiyo hoteli. At this is a special operation zone. Nenda kufanya ile seminar. Wamekuja na ile nini yao, wamejivisha na hiyo yao na tear gas. Dakika 2-3 namna hii, damu kila mahali. Wamepiga watu mbaya zaidi. Sisi tulikuwa sasa pale kama mateka. Ndege hakuna ya kurudi Nairobi, simu hakuna. Tunalala hapo nje hapo kwa rafiki zetu. Asubuhi tunavuka mto, tunaingia Ethiopia, tunakaa mpaka jioni. Na tuko Kenya. Tuko Kenya, watu walikuwa natawaliwa kama people ambao wako ndani ya occupied land. Na Nyayo wakikija watu wanapiga yeye makofi, mzee amefika, mbeba zile masanduku ya pesa, hii ya wazee, hii ya mama, ya nini, ati itatengenezwa nini. Akitoka mwaka mmoja kuna chochote kinaendelea. Kule nini huko nini Mandera, hata huko nini Wajia, watu wameona lami juzi tu baada ya devolution kukuja. Tulipokuwa napigania mambo ya devolution, watu walikuwa